What is a habit? It can be observed that habits can be learned and habits can also be unlearned. From the popular adage, attributed perhaps erroneously to Charles Reade, that goes, "Sow a thought, reap an action. Sow an action, reap a habit. Sow a habit, reap a character. Sow a character, reap a destiny." Habits have a natural pull of their own, just like gravity. They create the order in which we find in our little personal worlds. They establish coherence, or the lack thereof, in our lives. Just like many of the things that Stephen Covey discusses in his messages, trainings, and in his book, he tweaks the meaning of certain terms. The word habit is not an exception. In the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he defines habits as an intersection between 3 different paradigms, which are desire, skill, and knowledge. These are the what, the why, the how-to, and the want-to in our lives. So what are the 7 habits that make people succeed better than others? They are the following. 1. Being proactive. 2. Beginning with the end in mind. 3. Doing first things first. 4. Thinking win-win. 5. Seeking first to understand before seeking to be understood. 6. Synergy. 7. Sharpening the saw. Habit 1. Being proactive. Again, when you read anything from this book, one of the things that you should keep in mind is to expect the meaning behind words to get tweaked slightly. Being proactive allows you to take advantage of that faculty that only humans have, the ability to have freedom to choose how to think and eventually make up your mind. That means you can take initiative in different matters. The opposite of that is just reacting to events and other stimuli. That also means focusing on the things that you have control over. Habit 2. Begin with the end in mind. Beginning with the end in mind is like proactively making a New Year's resolution. We all know that the resolutions that we make during the dawning of the coming year eventually get broken. This habit is like that, only that you envision what you want to achieve and you actively make plans to achieve what you've envisioned, i.e., your mission statement. You'll also include in the mission statement that you will formulate how to overcome obstacles that will come along the way. Habit number 3, putting first things first. This habit puts the Pareto principle in action. That means you should focus on the most important 20% of tasks, as well as activities that will produce 80% of results. Here, Stephen Covey introduces the time management grid. You know that you're being effective in your activities management. The author points out that time management is a misnomer. When you are focusing your most important 20% energy and effort on quadrant 2 tasks, i.e. things that are important but not urgent. Habit 4. Think win-win. This habit changes one's perspectives from that of scarcity to abundance, where there is truly enough for everybody. That allows people to shift their views of others from competitors to allies and partners in cooperative efforts. This habit is the opposite of the I win, you lose mentality. Habit 5. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. There are types of communication, basically writing, reading, listening, and speaking. This habit highlights the most important type, listening. To communicate effectively, one must first improve one's listening skills, and then, after understanding the other fellow's point, one communicates one's point. Habit 6. Synergize. Synergy requires that the whole to be greater than the sum of the parts. It means cooperatively working with other people and organizations where your strengths complement their weaknesses and vice versa. This habit also makes one admit that you need the skills and attributes of others to reach your goals. Habit 7. Sharpen the saw. Stephen Covey teaches this habit in a classic parable about a woodcutter who worked longer hours to earn more and wonders why he eventually produced less. Why did he produce less whilst working more? Well, he forgot to sharpen his saw. This habit focuses on self-renewal, another inherent human trait not found in other creatures of this earth. The main point is that you are your best product. That means you should invest time, effort, and money on yourself to improve the different facets of your social, mental, spiritual, and physical facets. Habit 1. Be proactive. Principles of personal vision. Again, when it comes to the jargon that Stephen Covey uses in his book, it's best to put aside any preconceived ideas you may have. You can add what you have already learned a little later after you have understood the additional meaning that the author puts into these terms. Let's go back to the idea of a paradigm for a moment. Habit 1, along with habits 2 and 3, will require that paradigm shift, and they're all focused on self-mastery. On top of that, these habits also require one to move from a state of dependence to that of independence. What does it mean to be proactive? Habit 1. Being proactive moves away from other paradigms of human behavior, such as genetic determinism, that teaches one that your genes dictate who you truly are. It also deviates from psychic determinism, that says that your upbringing and your childhood have shaped you to become who you are. Finally, habit number 1 also breaks away from the views of environmental determinism, which says your environment has shaped human behavior. The prevailing paradigms that people espouse include the assumption that we simply just react to stimulus, which dictate our response. You have a choice. Covey cites Viktor Frankl to counter such notions. It would also be a good thing to remember the following quote from the man. Between stimulus and response, man has the freedom to choose. What point was Covey trying to make? It's simple. Every human being has the power to alter what would have been viewed as the immediate and expected response. Embracing the habit of proactivity also means taking that paradigm shift that goes with it. That is the exercise of the human gift of freedom of choice. The habit of proactivity allows you independent will apart from the stimulus that may nudge you to action in a certain way. It empowers you for self-awareness, conscience, and imagination. It should also be noted that habit number 1 does not deny the effects of the environment, one's upbringing, and genetics on human behavior. However, a highly effective person will recognize his responsibility, i.e. his response plus ability. Yes, the environment, your upbringing, and your genetics play key roles in your decision-making, but you have to recognize the fact that you can shape whatever response you will give to a stimulus. More than just positive thinking. Being proactive means more than just exercising positive thinking. It means you understand the realities of a given situation. Understanding the very reality of your situation also implicates that you can choose how you will respond to your current circumstances. Stephen Covey also points out that we can only influence a very small portion of the many things that we care about. He also observes that a lot of people either complain or worry about the things they have no control over. The more you focus on the things that are outside your circle of influence, there will only be a few things that you'll be able to directly control. This will eventually reduce the level of your influence. In stark contrast, when you proactively focus your time and energy on the things that you have direct control, then your level of influence increases. Here's a trick that you can try to increase your circle of influence. Instead of focusing on the haves, examples include, if only I was born rich, if only I had a big house, if only I had a better father, etc. You should instead focus on the bees. I can be more hardworking. I can be more honest. I can be more studious. I can be more loving, etc. Habit 2. Begin with the end in mind. Principles of personal leadership. When you embark on a quest, you usually have a clear picture of your destination. The same is true with everything that we want to achieve. If we can create a crystal clear picture of what it would be like to have the very thing that you want to get, then things will be a lot easier. Having that clear picture in mind, you can decide what guiding principle should govern your choices from the start. That way, decisions, especially the critical ones, will be made with a degree of foreknowledge and insight. Covey even insists that one's conscience comes into play during the planning stage, when you create the grand scheme of things. You will be using your conscience to select the guiding values that will affect your decision-making process. Private and public victories. Achieving your mission will include small steps into progress. Each one will be called a victory, which may include a promotion, a pay rise, establishing a business, gaining more customers, etc. We celebrate these little victories and evaluate our course if they contribute to the big picture that we've envisioned in the beginning. This regular evaluation is important, as Stephen Covey explains himself. It's incredibly easy to get caught up in an activity trap, in the busyness of life, to work harder and harder at climbing the ladder of success, only to discover that it's leaning against the wrong wall. You can say that habit 1 tells you that you are the creator. Along with that line, you can also say that habit 2 is your very first creation, as you've gained the habit of proactivity. Since we've become self-aware through habit 1, we now have empowered ourselves to shape our lives as we see fit. We no longer live our lives by default, and we no longer base our actions and decisions according to the preferences and standards of other people. Business applications. Habit 2 is applicable to businesses as well. If you want to optimize your business for better efficiency, then this habit becomes pretty useful. With it, you can set up a strategic vision for your business or organization. Re-scripting. Through this habit, we become aware of the ineffective scripts that we have embraced. These scripts have been written for you by others in life. You can proactively write new scripts that are based on your very own values, i.e., the things that matter to you. That means we write scripts according to our own centers. Whatever is at the center of your life will be the thing that will empower you. It will also become the source of wisdom, guidance, and security. Those who are spouse-centered have their security based on the way their spouse treats them. Their direction comes from their own needs and, of course, the needs of their spouse. Those who are work-centered have defined their identity based on the role in their occupation. Their decisions will be based on the expectations set at work. There are also those who are pleasure-centered. Their decisions are based on what gives them pleasure. They gauge the world in terms of what is in it for them. Of course, there are those who are self-centered. Note that these people have constantly shifting levels of security. They view the world and base their decisions on how the events will eventually affect them. There are, of course, other life centers. Some examples of these centers include church, enemy, friend, possessions, money, family, and others. Stephen Covey points out that these life centers aren't optimal. The only optimal and long-lasting centers are timeless principles that never change. Putting habit 2 into practice. Stephen Covey suggests several ways in order to practice habit 2. First off is to visualize your own funeral in rich detail. Put emphasis on what the people in attendance would say about you. Another way to practice this is to imagine that you only have 30 days left to live. List down your priorities and then live them. Another way to practice this habit is to list down the different roles you play in life. Next, for each role you play in private and public life, list down 5 goals you want to achieve for each of them, and then live them. One last way is to identify what scares you. Is it critical feedback? Is it public speaking? Write down in detail the worst-case scenario, and then formulate a way in which you will handle it. Habit 3. Put first things first. Principles of personal management. It's one thing just to be busy and totally another thing to get busy doing the right things. The former will just get you busy without any assurance that you're getting closer to your goal, while the latter will get you to your goals faster. Stephen Covey introduces us to the misnomer of time management. We all have similar amounts of time, 24 hours. What we are truly doing is activities management. That is, we manage our activities given the set amount of time provided for us. Human beings, every single day. To manage our daily tasks more effectively, we must do first things first. In essence, we must identify our goals and then the tasks that contribute to the completion of those goals. We then focus our time and effort on said tasks, leaving aside the rest for another day, or maybe delegate them to others. Our values have been determined as we focused on habit 2. We've also set up what we really want to achieve and the mini steps, as it were, that will help us get there. In habit 3, we now take actual steps and actions in order to achieve these set goals. However, we don't do things in a crazed frenzy. We organize our efforts to make our efforts more efficient. We schedule our day-to-day activities from moment to moment. Note that doing so will test our resolve. That is the challenge of trying to achieve worthwhile goals. There will be many distractions that will try to derail our efforts. Obviously, we need to take a disciplined approach. In order to maintain discipline and focus, we need to draw on our individual willpower in order to stay on track. It will take practice to keep going as we're driven by our values. Always, our impulses will be there to tempt us at any given moment. Stephen Covey once wisely said that, "The challenge is not to maintain time, but to manage ourselves." To help us stay focused, the author introduces us to the time management matrix. This matrix has 4 quadrants. The top left quadrant is quadrant 1, and it includes activities that are urgent and important. These include pressing problems, crises that arise, and deadline-driven activities. Quadrant 2 includes activities that are also important, but are not urgent. This includes things like building relationships, planning, and also recognizing new opportunities. Quadrant 2 is the upper right corner of the matrix. Quadrant 3 is on the lower left of the matrix. This includes activities that are not important but urgent. You can include interruptions, popular activities, meetings, and, believe or not, phone calls. Well, some of them anyway. Quadrant 4 is on the lower right of the matrix, and it includes activities that are also not important, but are also not urgent. You include activities that you can do just to kill time, pleasant activities, and also the usual trivial busy work at home or in the workplace. So how do we maintain effective activities or time management? The answer is in staying with Quadrant 2 activities. There's no rush yet. You're doing the really important things. Putting habit 3 into practice. The author has several suggestions on how we can practice doing Quadrant 2 activities and put first things first. First off, we need to list down all the important and non-urgent things that we need to do. After that, we must identify which of those Quadrant 2 activities we have been neglecting. Write it down, and then you should include a method of implementation. After that, you should commit to it. You should also create a time management activity matrix and then categorize each of your daily activities into each of the 4 quadrants. This will help you see where you've been focusing. You should also estimate how much of your time you've spent in each quadrant thus far. After that, you should reallocate amounts of time that you should be spending on each of these activities. Of course, prioritizing Quadrant 2 activities. Habit 4. Think win-win. Principles of interpersonal leadership. Habit 4 requires one to commit to creating situations that are mutually beneficial to the people in whom we have relationships with. Stephen Covey, in his chapter, points out 6 different paradigms that people use to govern human interaction. Win-win. In this paradigm, both parties win. Solutions and agreements end up as something that is mutually beneficial. Both parties receive satisfaction in the relationship. Win-lose. This is the if I win, you lose paradigm. People who espouse this point of view tend to use their credentials, personality, power, and position to get their way with things. Lose-win. This is the I lose, you win point of view. People with this paradigm are always set to appease and to please the other party in the relationship. Their strength is based on the acceptance of others and their own popularity. Lose-lose. Given this paradigm, both parties in the relationship lose. This can sometimes occur when two people with win-lose paradigms form a relationship with one another. Imagine two individuals who are both ego-invested, fully determined, and absolutely stubborn getting together and spending time with one another. At the end of the day, nobody wins because each will want to have his way. Win. People with the win point of view or mentality don't really care if the other person wins or loses in the relationship or not. That detail basically doesn't matter to them. The only thing that's important to these people is that they get whatever it is that they want. Win-win or no deal. This mentality or paradigm is one where both parties will only agree on mutually beneficial results, or else there'll be no moving forward. This habit calls for creating more win-win situations. To achieve that, you should take in an abundance mentality. This is the belief that there's always plenty for everybody. A lot of people are taught or brought up in a scarcity mentality. Given that mindset, one believes that successes are limited. That's why recognition and good credit can only be extended to a few. With that mentality, it would be difficult to be genuinely happy for the success of others. In order to think win-win, one must focus on the problem and not the people involved. One must also consider the results and not focus on the methods used. One final key ingredient to this habit, especially in the business scene, is that it cannot survive in an environment of steep competition. Rewards systems must be aligned with the company's values and goals. Putting Habit 4 into practice. Here are several ways you can try to practice Habit 4. Think win-win. First, think of a meeting or interaction, anything that you expect to have with another person. It could be a meeting with a client, an interview with your child, a date with your wife, anything. In that meeting, think about a solution or maybe an agreement that you'll be having. Write down things that the other person will want to have or is looking for. Now, list down ways on how you can offer to have those needs or desires met. Here's another way you can put Habit 4 into practice. The first step is to identify 3 relationships in your life that you value the most. Think about each of these relationships. Figure out if you give more or take more in each of those relationships. Now, list down 10 things that you can do to give more in each of those relationships rather than taking more, and then do them. Habit 5. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. Principles of empathic communication. Stephen Covey stresses that one of the most important communication skills that we need to develop is listening. We have been, for most of our lives, educated and trained on how to communicate to others, both in writing and in speech. However, there's very little training on how to listen. That is pretty ironic. Habit 5 puts the art of listening at the forefront of our communication. Covey observes that we're all too quick to prescribe a solution before we even try to make a diagnosis. It is this shoot first, ask questions later method of communication that does not help to build our relationships with others. Habit 5 will make us deeply understand the problem first. Seek first to understand what the other person is saying, not only through words, but also in their actions, facial expressions, and nonverbal cues. It should be noted here that only 10% of our communication is through our words. 30% of all communication is actually through sounds, and 60% of communication is actually done via body language. Only after understanding the other fellow and seeing things from his view are we supposed to strive to be understood. Now, that may seem hard in a world where people tend to be quite assertive in pretty much every aspect of their lives. The author has the following to say about that. You have to build the skills of empathic listening on a base of character that inspires openness and trust. Most people listen only because they want to formulate a reply. This habit makes us want to listen because we want to understand. When we listen with empathy, we gain a deep understanding of the person we're talking to. We then formulate our response within the context of the other person's understanding. Our response, therefore, includes a deeper understanding of the other person's concerns, as well as their needs. If you do that, then the credibility of your ideas tend to increase, because you and the person, or people you're communicating to, understand one another. That is so much easier than backing up the conversation simply because you misunderstood one another. The second half of the habit, seeking to be understood, is critical. This is crucial if you want to achieve win-win solutions. It takes courage to respond in such a way as to address the other person's concerns. In the end, you and the person you're communicating with will come up with solutions or agreements that are practical and useful to both parties. How to put Habit 5 into practice. Here are a few things that you can do to put Habit 5 into practice. One thing you can do is to observe when two people around you are communicating with one another. Don't listen to the words they're saying, but pay attention only to the emotions being communicated nonverbally. Try to figure out if one person is more interested in the conversation than the other. Write down every bit of nonverbal cue that you've picked up. List down what you've learned from this experience. Note that practicing this will help you try to understand the other person better by reading their nonverbal cues. Here's another way you can try to practice how to seek first to understand before you seek to be understood. Next time you're given the opportunity to address a group or provide a presentation, base everything on the practice of empathy. You should include a huge portion of the beginning of your presentation, a description of the point of view of your audience. Add detail to it. You may even ask for input from those in attendance. Include the very problems that they're currently facing. Now, figure out how your presentation is going to offer a possible solution to their problems. Habit 6. Synergize. Principles of creative cooperation. Habit 6 builds on what habits you have already gained in the 7 habits of highly effective people. You basically can't get this far without being able to practice the previous 5 habits. In our daily lives, we meet and interact with people whose views and actions vary, and in certain cases, contradict our own. For some, these are avenues for friction and irritability. However, for highly effective people, these differences are opportunities for more creativity and openness. Imagine 2 different plants that grow side by side. Their roots will eventually commingle and get intertwined as they grow. When that happens, the quality of the soil is going to be improved to such a degree that cannot be achieved by the individual root systems by themselves. That is synergy. When the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. When people of different backgrounds, skills, and capacities work cooperatively, they achieve more than what they can achieve individually. The weaknesses of some will complement the strengths of others, and vice versa. Synergy opens new possibilities for everyone involved as a whole. They will be able to create new alternatives that never been seen before by each individual member of the team. Everyone eventually would be more willing to ditch any of their old scripts that do not fit into the whole and write new ones that benefit everyone. Stephen Covey once said, "The key to valuing differences is to realize that all people see the world not as it is, but as they are." When you practice synergy, you will learn to creatively catalyze with others. You will learn to find a better solution that will better benefit everyone in the group and not just you or a select few. You will learn to analyze all the alternatives, then create new ones that no one ever thought of before. Synergy also allows you to value the differences that you observe in other people. Doing so will also expand your perspective. It will also train you to see the good in others and sidestep any negative energy wherever it is present. You will also learn how to be open and encourage other people to do likewise. It will also encourage you to exercise courage whenever you find yourself in interdependent situations. The fear of the unknown result will not be a factor in your interactions with others. How to put habit 6 into practice. Here are a few exercises that you can do to put habit 6 into practice. First off, make a list of the people who irritate you. Now, check out your list and pick one person. It doesn't have to be the most irritating person on the list. Now, think about that person. How are your views different from that person's views? Now, empathize with that person for a minute or two. Try to feel and also think just like that person. How does it feel? Does this help you understand them a lot better? Next time you have another exchange with this person, try to do this exercise. Put yourself in that person's place and try to see the other point of view. This time it will be easier to change their point of view, and at times it will be a lot easier to change yours. Here's another exercise. Make a list of people you agree with or get along with well. Again, choose one person on that list. Figure out how are your views different. Try to recall when you and that person worked well together. Why do you think you worked well with that person even though your views may have variances? What conditions facilitated in the fluidity of the interactions between the two of you? Try to find ways to recreate those conditions. Habit 7. Sharpen the saw. Principles of a balanced self-renewal. The capacity for self-renewal is one of the things that make us, human beings, unique from the rest of all the creatures on this planet. We have the capacity to continuously reinvent ourselves, and thus obtain continuing growth and development. To be truly effective, we need to devote both time and effort for self-renewal in the various facets or dimensions of our being, namely socially, mentally, spiritually, and physically. Continuous self-renewal actually turns everything around. It even affects the rest of the habits that have been discussed. This 7th and final habit helps us to practice the rest of the other habits more effectively. Stephen Covey calls this habit sharpening the saw. This, of course, alludes to that parabolic story of the carpenter who forgot to sharpen his saw. In his diagram of the 7 habits, Covey represents self-renewal as the all-encompassing habit that surrounds all the other habits, and it makes it possible to enhance and preserve your greatest asset, yourself. Renewing the physical dimension. Renewing the physical dimension enhances our capacity to work. It also improves our ability to enjoy things and adapt to different life changes. To renew oneself physically requires us to eat well, get sufficient rest, take time out and relax, and finally, to exercise to gain and maintain strength, flexibility, and endurance. Renewing the physical dimension actually helps us build habit 1 proactively. We will tend to act and make decisions based on our well-being instead of reacting to things that will not help us physically fit. Renewing the spiritual dimension. Renewing the spiritual dimension reinforces our leadership capacities and helps us renew our commitment to our overall value system. We are reminded all over again of all the things that we value the most. To renew the spiritual self, one should practice daily meditation. You need time out from the world and to be alone by yourself. You should also find time to commune with nature. Appreciate the world around you and find that spiritual connection with this world in which you live in. You can also find spiritual renewal through music and literature. Renewing the mental dimension. Mental health is one department that some people forget to tend to. You do not only need to find that peace, but also be able to expand the capacity of your mind. Renewing this dimension reinforces habit 3. Thus, we learn to maximize the way we use our time and manage ourselves better. Reading good literature will help you renew your mental dimension. You should also keep a journal and in it record your insights, experiences, and your thoughts. You should also limit your TV time to shows that actually enrich your mind and your life. Renewing the social or emotional dimension. We are social and emotional beings. Nothing can take that away from us. Getting social renewal helps us create and reinforce social relationships, which become more meaningful. Renewing the social self will help to reinforce habits 4, 5, and 6. To renew the social dimension, we should practice understanding other people more deeply. We should also take part in outreach projects that tend to improve the lives of other people. We should also maintain a mentality of abundance. How to put habit 7 into practice. Here are some exercises that you can do in order to put to practice the 7th habit. The first one is to identify and make a list of activities that tend to help you achieve self-renewal. The self-renewal that you get from said activities should encompass all 4 dimensions mentioned in this chapter. Select one activity from each of the 4 dimensions. Now, pick one activity from the 4 and use that as your activity goal for the week. At the end of the week, you should evaluate your performance. Determine what led you to succeed or fail the said goal. Do the same thing again for each of the other 3 activities that you have selected. Next, since you already have a list of activities that help you sharpen the saw, choose an activity that you can do each week. Do that and then evaluate the results you get for that week. Stephen Covey closes his book with a quote from Ezra Taft Benson, former U.S. Secretary of Agriculture. The quote, of course, is insightful and covers pretty much what he wanted to point out in the closing pages. The Lord works from the inside out. The world works from the outside in. The world would take people out of the slums. Christ takes the slums out of people, and then they themselves out of the slums. The world would mold men by changing their environment. Christ changes men who then change their environment. The world would shape human behavior, but Christ can change human nature. It doesn't matter if you're religious or not. It would be more important to notice the 2 approaches to achieve growth and development. One is from the outside in, and the other one is working from the inside out. Covey's message, of course, is to work your way from the inside, changing human nature, and then changing the world around you. He illustrates this point, just like in the many lessons in the 7 Habits book, through a story. During his sabbatical in Leh, Hawaii, Stephen and his wife Sandra encountered a serious conflict on an issue that would seem very trivial: which brand of appliance they should get. Sandra insisted that they should only get Frigidaire-branded appliances, even if it meant traveling to the big city, which was not practical and was really inconvenient. When the conflict arose, Stephen withdrew into his private, dysfunctional behavior that he got from his father. Well, Sandra became more vocal, something that she too learned from her father as well. Both of them decided to practice deep communication, something that they had been doing for quite some time. What they learned about each other and themselves was truly revelatory. Stephen learned about the close relationship that Sandra had with her father. He also learned of a time during a financial crisis when the business of Sandra's father was only kept afloat because the Frigidaire company financed the entire inventory of appliances in their store. This fact was pivotal, and it took deep roots. Throughout this communication, they developed an increased sense of reverence for each other. They both learned that there were deep-seated issues underneath what might seem like a very trivial issue. The key, of course, was to reach deep within and then move outwards. Intergenerational living. From that exercise, both Stephen and Sandra preferred the inside-out approach, and not only in communication. They developed a deeper relationship of trust for one another. They examined the scripts and paradigms that they developed and wrote new scripts and paradigms. Eventually, they developed what Stephen would later call Quadrant 2 activities. They also realized that just as their views and temperaments were affected by their parents, they also realized that their views and temperaments had a profound effect on their children as well. The scripts get passed on from one generation to the next. This led them to reconsider and redevelop everything with the sole intent of intergenerational living. Covey points out that this is one of the highest motivations. Becoming a transition person. The goal, of course, is to give your posterity both roots to look back on and wings, figuratively of course, with which they can use to fly and explore in their own. He identifies himself as being the transition person, as his good friend Dr. Terry Werner coined it. A transition person is one who recognizes the faulty scripts that they've been handed down from one generation to the next, and that person decides not to pass it on. For instance, if you grew up in an environment where your father abused you or mistreated you as a child, you don't grow up wanting to mistreat and abuse your children, right? You will have the desire to treat them better. You will rewrite the script that you have inherited and write your own, one that is based on new values that you've selected. That, of course, requires proactivity. Change, and Covey stresses real change, comes from the inside out and not from outside in. A personal note from Stephen Covey. On a personal note, Covey expresses his beliefs that there are facets of human nature that are outside the reach of government legislation. He believes that there are changes that require a more divine source in order to create change. However, when we align ourselves, which includes our thoughts, systems, paradigms, and habits, with time-tested and universal principles, then we've tapped into a higher source to effect change, growth, and development. The struggle to practice the 7 habits is real, and even the author confesses his own shortcomings in that regard. The struggle is real, but the journey indeed is fulfilling. We hope that as you've studied the 7 habits of highly effective people, that you've begun your very own paradigm shift. It's not always easy, and change sometimes takes a while to take effect. Even Dr. Covey himself admits that he struggles practicing the 7 habits. It may very well be a lifelong pursuit, albeit a fruitful and rewarding one. One of the first paradigm shifts you need to make is to become proactive in your life. You need to stop and take control of the situation and stop being a reactant to the different stimuli that come along your way. Habit 1. You empower yourself by regaining that freedom of choice and choosing the most effective response to everything that comes to you. Your first proactive work will be to envision the end from the beginning. Habit 2. Given a challenge or a goal, see yourself conquering and achieving, all the while formulating proactively the very steps and successes you need in order to attain that end result. That also means that you need to identify, categorize, and emphasize certain tasks. Habit 3. You need to identify the things that are important but not urgent, and focus on those tasks in order to become more effective. Remember that you should do first things first for the majority of the things that you need to do. You now move on to things that involve others. You can't hope to achieve lasting success with the limits that are naturally within you. Habit 4 prepares you for interpersonal leadership. You, with the help of those around you, will find actions and decisions with mutual benefit. Habit 5 emphasizes the most important part of communication: listening. The world will be better with more good listeners, since we are already good talkers anyway. Habit 6, on the other hand, improves your interpersonal cooperation. You allow others to take control over things that you aren't prepared for or have no experience in. Finally, Habit 7 reinforces each of the 6 habits already covered. Human beings are empowered with the ability to renew their personal, spiritual, physical, and mental dimensions. Practicing the 7 habits will take a lifetime. It's an investment in the self with the effect of benefiting others as well. After all, we are our best investment, and we are our best gifts to an already wounded world. May success and fulfillment find you as you strive to live each of these habits to the fullest.